Now!
Judge, this is my home. Do you have a warrant?
Yeah? That's what they all say when they get caught somewhere they don't belong.
I belong here. You're on my property.
You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. Get on the ground before I put you there.
At 6:42 on a Sunday morning in Coral Springs, Florida, the street was still. Sprinklers ticked across trimmed lawns. A few porch lights glowed in the early gray. Federal Judge Nadine Ashford, 54 years old, stood beside her car in the driveway wearing a white dress and low heels, a Bible and handbag on the passenger seat, her keys in her hand. She was heading to early service the way she did most Sundays, quietly and alone. Then 3 unmarked black SUVs turned hard onto her street, engines loud enough to break the silence of the entire block. They pulled into her driveway in formation, tires barking against the pavement. 6 ICE agents stepped out in tactical vests, sidearms visible, boots heavy on the concrete. The lead agent, Brock Stanton, 43, moved toward her with one hand resting on his holster and the other pointing directly at her. "Don't move. Stay right there." Ashford froze, keys still between her fingers. Behind Stanton, 5 agents fanned out across her property like she was a target in a raid. No one announced a warrant. No one stated probable cause. No one asked a single question before giving commands. What Ashford didn't know yet was that minutes earlier, Stanton had keyed his radio and told dispatch he was approaching a residence where the occupant, quote, "doesn't match the address." That phrase, captured on the dispatch recording, would become the first piece of evidence in a federal investigation that would end careers, trigger congressional hearings, and settle for millions. But in that moment, all Nadine Ashford knew was that 6 armed men had surrounded her in her own driveway, and not one of them saw a judge. They saw a black woman who, in their eyes, didn't belong. Nadine Ashford was not a woman the system had overlooked. She was one it had elevated because she had earned every step. Born in Liberty City, Miami, one of the toughest neighborhoods in South Florida, she was raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a hospital custodian. She attended public schools where half the students didn't graduate. She did, first in her class. A full academic scholarship took her to Howard University, where she studied political science and graduated summa cum laude. Then came Yale Law School, where she was one of only a handful of black women in her class. She clerked for a federal appellate judge in the 11th Circuit, then spent over a decade as a civil rights litigator, before being nominated to the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida. She was confirmed with bipartisan support 7 years before that Sunday morning. On the bench, she was known for being fair but immovable. She followed the law with precision and held every party to the same standard, including federal agencies. In multiple immigration cases, she had ruled against ICE for due process violations, sloppy filings, and unlawful detentions. Her opinions were cited in appellate decisions. Her name carried weight inside the Department of Justice. She had lived in the same Coral Springs home for 9 years. Her neighbors knew her by name. Her mail carrier waved every afternoon. Her lawn was maintained, her taxes paid, her life built with discipline and intention. None of that mattered to Brock Stanton. He didn't run her name. He didn't check the deed. He saw a black woman in a neighborhood that didn't fit his assumptions, and that was enough. Brock Stanton had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 17 years, all of them stationed out of the Miami field office. He had built a career not on precision or professionalism, but on volume. High numbers, fast operations, minimal paperwork. Among colleagues, he was known as a cowboy, the kind of agent who moved first and justified later. He ran his unit like a patrol squad with no leash, targeting neighborhoods based on instinct rather than intelligence, stopping people based on appearance rather than evidence. His file told a story his supervisors had chosen not to read: 11 formal complaints from detainees and residents over the past decade, allegations of racial profiling, verbal abuse during stops, fabricated justifications entered into reports after the fact to cover baseless detentions. Every single complaint had been reviewed internally and dismissed, not investigated thoroughly, not referred to the Inspector General, dismissed. His supervisor, Deputy Field Director Vance Kellner, 51, had shielded Stanton for years. Kellner liked results. He liked agents who didn't hesitate, and Stanton delivered numbers that made the office look productive, even if the methods behind those numbers would never survive outside scrutiny. Kellner signed off on Stanton's reports without question, approved his operations without oversight, and praised him in performance reviews as, quote, one of our most effective field leaders. Among immigration attorneys and advocacy organizations in South Florida, Stanton's unit had earned a different kind of reputation. They called them the hunting party, not because of what they found, but because of how they operated, moving through affluent zip codes, stopping people who looked out of place to them, and building cases backward from assumptions rather than forward from facts. That was the man now standing in Nadine Ashford's driveway, hand on his weapon, voice raised, giving orders to a woman he hadn't bothered to identify. Stanton's first words were not a question. They were a command. Step away from the vehicle. Put your hands where I can see them. Ashford set her keys on the roof of her car, slowly, keeping her movements visible. She had spent decades in courtrooms watching defendants' rights get trampled by exactly this kind of approach. She knew what was happening. I'm a federal judge, she said, her voice calm and deliberate. This is my home. I'd like to see a warrant. Stanton didn't reach for paperwork. He laughed, a short, dismissive exhale through his nose that the dispatch audio would later confirm. Behind her, Agent Luke Driscoll, 36, 6 years with ICE, positioned himself between Ashford and her front door. He didn't announce himself. He didn't explain. He simply stood there, arms crossed, blocking her path back into her own house. To her left, Agent Tara Nolan, 31, held a department-issued recording device at chest height. The red light was on, but the angle was wrong. Nolan kept the lens tilted slightly downward, capturing boots and pavement rather than faces and hands. It would later be proven in the federal investigation that Nolan adjusted the camera's angle 3 separate times during the encounter, each time away from the moments of greatest force. Ashford asked again, "Do you have a warrant?" Stanton stepped closer. "Ma'am, warrants aren't your concern right now. What you need to do is cooperate, or this gets worse for you." She asked a third time, slower, louder, voice steady enough for anyone within earshot to hear. "I am asking you for the third time. Do you have a warrant to be on my property?" Stanton said nothing. Across the street, a door opened. Colonel Edwin Osei, 67, retired United States Marine Corps, stepped onto his front porch in a bathrobe, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He had watched the SUVs arrive, he had seen the agents fan out, and now he saw his neighbor, a woman he had known for nearly a decade, standing surrounded in her own driveway with no explanation and no warrant. Osei raised his phone and pressed record. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The camera was steady, the angle was wide, and it captured everything Nolan's device was carefully avoiding. For several seconds, no one moved. Ashford stood with her hands visible, her posture still, her voice the only thing she offered. She had complied with every instruction. She had not raised her voice. She had not stepped toward any agent. She had answered clearly and identified herself 3 times. None of it mattered. Stanton's patience, what little he had carried into the driveway, was gone. He tilted his head slightly toward Driscoll, then looked back at Ashford. "You're being evasive. Get on the ground. Now." Ashford's voice didn't waver. "I am a sitting federal judge of the United States District Court. This is my home. You have no warrant. This is an unlawful detention." Stanton moved before she finished the sentence. His left hand clamped around her right wrist. He twisted her arm behind her back with a sharp upward pull that made her gasp. Her heels slipped on the concrete. Her knees hit the driveway first, then her shoulder, then her forehead. The sound was hard and immediate, skin and bone against rough pavement. The white dress she had pressed for church tore at the knee. A line of blood appeared above her left eye where her brow had struck the ground. Driscoll was on her within seconds, pinning her left arm flat, while Stanton wrenched the right one higher and snapped cuffs over both wrists. Nolan stood 6 feet away, department camera still running, still angled low, still capturing nothing that mattered. She did not speak. She did not intervene. She did not move. Then the front door opened. Elijah, 14, Ashford's grandson, stood in the doorway barefoot, wearing pajamas. He saw his grandmother face down on the concrete, blood running down her temple, two men kneeling on her back, her church dress stained and torn. He screamed, not words, just sound. The kind of sound a child makes when the world stops making sense. Stanton's head snapped toward the door. He pointed one finger directly at the boy. Get back inside or you're next. Elijah stumbled backward into the house. The door stayed open. From across the street, every frame of it was being recorded. Colonel Edwin Osei had not moved from his porch. His phone was steady, in his right hand, held at eye level, the camera capturing a wide, unobstructed view of the entire driveway. The audio was clean. The angle was unbroken. He recorded Stanton's commands. He recorded Ashford's calm, repeated identification of herself. He recorded the grab, the twist, the moment her face hit the pavement. He recorded Driscoll pinning her arm. He recorded Nolan standing still with her camera tilted toward the ground during the exact seconds the force was applied. And he recorded the moment Stanton pointed at a 14-year-old boy in pajamas and threatened to arrest him for standing in his grandmother's doorway. Osei's hands didn't shake. 30 years in the Marine Corps had trained that out of him a long time ago. Behind him, through the screen door, his wife Grace was already on the phone with 911. There are federal agents assaulting our neighbor, she said, her voice tight but clear. She's a federal judge. They have her on the ground in handcuffs. She's bleeding. There's a child in the house. The dispatcher paused. Ma'am, did you say a federal judge? Grace repeated it. Yes. Judge Nadine Ashford, Southern District of Florida. She lives across the street. They're hurting her right now. The call was logged at 6:51 a.m., 9 minutes after the SUVs had arrived. Before hanging up, Grace gave the address, the number of agents, and a description of the vehicles. Then Osei made a second call. This one to a contact at the Broward County NAACP chapter, a man he'd known for 20 years. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke 5 sentences. They just put Judge Ashford on the ground in her driveway. ICE agents. No warrant. I have video. Call everyone. Within minutes, that call became 2 calls, then 5, then 12. By the time Stanton walked back to his SUV, the chain had already reached Washington. He just didn't know it yet. They left her on the ground for 28 minutes. 28 minutes on hot Florida concrete in a white church dress, with her wrists cuffed behind her back and blood drying above her left eye. The sun had started to climb. The pavement was already warm and getting warmer. Ashford lay still, not because she had given up, but because she understood that any movement could be used against her. So she spoke instead. My judicial credentials are in my purse. It's on the passenger seat. You can verify who I am right now. Stanton didn't check, didn't send anyone to look, didn't respond. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, waiting. Driscoll crouched near the SUV, running her name through federal databases. The process was slow. Not because the systems were slow, but because no one on that driveway was in any rush to admit a mistake. While they waited, Driscoll said something Osei's phone picked up with disturbing clarity. Judges don't live in places like this, not ones that look like her. Nolan said nothing. Down the block, doors had started opening. A woman in scrubs stood at the end of her walkway. A man 2 houses down recorded from a second angle. Inside, Elijah stood at the living room window, tears running down his face, both hands pressed against the glass, watching his grandmother bleed on her own driveway. Then at 7:10 a.m., a junior agent in one of the SUVs ran the property address through a federal database. The result came back instantly. The home was deeded to the Honorable Nadine R. Ashford, United States District Judge. He radioed Stanton privately. Stanton's face shifted. Not guilt. Something closer to calculation. He walked back, unlocked the cuffs, and dropped her wrists without a word. No apology, no explanation, no incident report offered. They drove away like it was any other Sunday morning. For a long time, Ashford didn't move. She sat on her driveway with her legs folded beneath her, one hand pressed to the cut above her eye, the other flat on the concrete. Her dress was torn. Her palms were scraped raw. The cuffs had left red welts around both wrists that would darken into bruises by nightfall. Blood had dried along her jawline. The Bible on the passenger seat was still there. The car door was still open. She never made it to church. Colonel Osei crossed the street immediately, his wife Grace, a step behind with a towel and ice from their freezer. Grace knelt and pressed the towel gently to the wound. Neighbors moved toward the driveway slowly. Someone called paramedics. Ashford's hands were shaking. Her voice was not. She looked at Osei and said, "I need my phone." He retrieved it from the car. She made 4 calls in under 10 minutes. The first to Chief Judge Leonard Keene of the Southern District of Florida. She told him what happened in the same measured tone she used from the bench. He said one sentence, "I'm calling the administrative office now," the second to the United States Marshal's Service. She identified herself, gave her address, and described the incident. A deputy marshal was dispatched immediately. The third to her personal attorney. The fourth was the hardest. She called her daughter Simone and told her what Elijah had seen. Inside the house, Elijah sat on the hallway floor with his arms wrapped around his knees, still crying. He hadn't moved since Stanton pointed at him and said he was next. He was 14 years old. Within 45 minutes, a U.S. Marshal arrived. The Chief Judge had contacted the administrative office of the courts. The Inspector General's office had been flagged. The machinery of federal judicial protection had begun to move, and it was moving fast. Back at the Miami field office that afternoon, Stanton sat at his desk and typed his report. The language was careful. His unit had responded to a credible tip regarding a potentially undocumented individual at a residential address in Coral Springs. The subject was uncooperative and aggressive upon contact. Minimal force was used to gain compliance. The matter was resolved when the subject's identity was clarified on scene. No injuries were reported. He signed it and submitted it. Driscoll co-signed without changing a word. Nolan uploaded her department-issued camera footage to the secure server. The video showed the SUVs arriving. It showed agents exiting vehicles. Then it jumped. The 28 minutes in between were either missing or obscured by angles that captured pavement, boots, and nothing else. No takedown, no cuffs, no blood above the eye. No one, 4-year-old boy, standing in the doorway. No finger pointed at his face. Kellner reviewed the file that evening. He read the summary, scanned the footage timestamps, and initialed the report without a single follow-up question. No request for additional footage, no interview with the subject, no cross-reference of the address, just a signature and a closed file. None of them knew about Osei's video. None of them knew Grace had called 911 at 6:51 a.m. and identified the woman on the ground as a federal judge. None of them knew the U.S. Marshals had already been contacted. None of them knew that by the time Kellner initialed that report, the Chief Judge of the Southern District of Florida had already made calls that couldn't be undone. They filed their version of the story and went home thinking it was over. It wasn't. Within 48 hours, Osei's video had traveled further than any of them could have imagined. A copy sat with the U.S. Marshal's Service, another with the DOJ Office of Inspector General, another with the Office of Professional Responsibility, another with the Congressional Black Caucus. Each copy carried the same unbroken footage, the same wide angle, the same clear audio, the same 28 minutes that Stanton's report had reduced to one sentence. A still frame was extracted and attached to an internal DOJ memorandum. It showed a black woman in a white dress face down on concrete, blood visible on her forehead, a federal agent positioned with his knee near her back. The memo was marked urgent. Chief Judge Leonard Keene did not wait for the system to move on its own. He personally called the Attorney General's office. The conversation was short. The DHS secretary was briefed the same day. A phrase appeared in one internal communication that would later be cited in congressional testimony. "They arrested one of ours." That sentence changed the speed of everything. ICE leadership in Washington went into immediate damage control. Within hours, Stanton, Driscoll, and Nolan were placed on administrative leave. Their badges were collected. Their access to federal systems was suspended. Kellner was pulled from supervisory duties without public announcement. His pending performance review was frozen. No press release was issued, no public statement was made. But inside the Department of Homeland Security, the silence was louder than any headline, because they had seen the video. They had read the report Stanton filed, and they knew those two things told completely different stories. DOJ and OIG investigators arrived at the Miami field office within a week. They did not come to ask questions. They came to pull files. Every operation Stanton's unit had run over the past 4 years was extracted, cataloged, and reviewed. The pattern was immediate and damning. Of all stops classified under credible tips, 84% targeted Black and Latino residents in affluent neighborhoods. The tips themselves were often anonymous, unverified, and in several cases fabricated entirely by agents to justify patrol routes through wealthy zip codes where minorities lived. 12 prior incidents mirrored the Ashford arrest almost exactly. Residents detained in their own driveways or front yards, ordered to prove they lived in their own homes, questioned without warrants, held without cause. Not one of those 12 people was ever charged with a crime. Not one incident resulted in disciplinary action. Then investigators compared Nolan's department camera footage with Osei's recording frame by frame. The timestamps aligned. The angles did not. At 3 separate moments during the encounter, Nolan had adjusted her camera away from the action. Each adjustment coincided precisely with a moment of escalation. The grab, the takedown, the threat to Elijah. Investigators concluded the angle changes were deliberate and constituted evidence tampering. But the most damaging discovery came from internal emails. A chain between Stanton and Kellner spanning 2 years showed Kellner advising agents on language, how to frame reports, which words triggered OIG review flags and which ones didn't, how to describe force as compliant-assisted positioning, how to classify racial stops under community safety protocols. One email from Kellner read, "Keep it clean on paper and nobody looks twice." That email would be read aloud in a federal courtroom less than a year later. The Congressional Black Caucus held a press conference on a Tuesday morning in Washington. Behind the podium, a screen displayed a single still frame from Osei's video. A black woman in a white dress, face down on concrete, blood on her forehead, 2 agents above her. The image played on every major network within the hour. It was shared millions of times before sundown. Congressional hearings were announced the same week. Ashford was invited to testify. She declined. Instead, she issued a written statement that was read into the record and reprinted in full by every major outlet. "I do not seek attention. I seek accountability. What happened to me happens to Black Americans every day, except most of them are not federal judges, and most of them do not have a neighbor with a camera." The statement landed with the weight of a ruling from the bench. It was precise, it was measured, and it left no room for rebuttal. Advocacy groups filed FOIA requests targeting ICE field office operations across the Southeast. Op-eds flooded editorial pages. Legal analysts dissected the case on cable news. Civil rights organizations called for a full restructuring of ICE oversight protocols. And then the calls started coming. Former detainees who had encountered Stanton's unit began reaching out to attorneys. People who had been stopped in their own neighborhoods, questioned without cause, held without explanation, and released without apology. People who had filed complaints that went nowhere. People who had been told by the system that what happened to them didn't matter. Now they had a name attached to a pattern. Now they had video. And now, for the first time, someone was listening. The outcomes came fast. Agent Brock Stanton was terminated for excessive force, falsifying federal reports, civil rights violations, and conduct unbecoming a federal officer. His 7-year career ended with a single letter and a referral to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. His badge was collected, his credentials were revoked, his name was flagged in every federal employment database. Agent Luke Driscoll was terminated for excessive force, co-signing a falsified report and racially discriminatory language captured on Osei's recording. Judges don't live in places like this. not ones that look like her. That sentence followed him out the door and into a federal referral of his own. Agent Tara Nolan was terminated for evidence tampering, failure to intervene during an unlawful use of force, and filing a misleading video record. The frame-by-frame comparison between her footage and Osei's left no room for the word accidental. She had watched a federal judge bleed on her own driveway and pointed her camera at the ground. Deputy Field Director Vance Kellner did not wait to be fired. He was given a choice and took the resignation, but it came with consequences: loss of pension, loss of federal retirement benefits, and a formal referral for investigation into years of supervisory negligence, obstruction, and coaching agents to falsify language in official reports. Keep it clean on paper, and nobody looks twice. That email alone would have ended him. 6 additional agents from Stanton's unit were placed under active investigation. 3 were suspended pending review. The Miami field office was placed under a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all field operations, real-time review of use of force incidents, and civilian auditing of agent complaint records. The hunting party was finished. Judge Ashford filed her lawsuit in the same federal courthouse where she sat on the bench. The suit named ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, Stanton, Driscoll, Nolan, and Kellner, each individually and in their official capacities. The claims were precise: unlawful arrest, excessive force, Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a separate claim filed on behalf of her grandson Elijah for psychological trauma suffered by a minor witness who watched his grandmother forced to the ground and was threatened with arrest in his own home. The government moved to settle quietly. The first offer came within weeks. Ashford rejected it. A second offer followed. She rejected that too. Her attorney made her position clear. This is not about a number. This is about a record. The case settled for $4.7 million, but the money was not what made the agreement historic. Attached to the settlement were mandated national reforms to ICE field operations, independent review of all warrantless stops, mandatory recording protocols using tamper-proof body cameras, a publicly accessible database of agent complaint histories, and required retraining on constitutional rights, racial bias, and use of force thresholds across every domestic field office. Separately, the criminal cases moved forward. Stanton and Driscoll were indicted on federal civil rights charges. Nolan entered a guilty plea to evidence tampering and received 14 months in federal custody. Driscoll was convicted and sentenced to 3 years. Stanton went to trial. He maintained he had acted on a credible tip and followed protocol. The jury watched Osei's video, read Stanton's report, and deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. 5 years in federal prison. The gavel satisfying a debt his badge never could. 6 months later, Judge Nadine Ashford walked into her courtroom in the Southern District of Florida. The gallery was full. When she appeared through the side door in her black robe, every person in the room stood. Not because the bailiff told them to, because they chose to. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Ashford said nothing about it. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and gavelled the room to order. The docket moved forward. She didn't reference the driveway. She didn't reference the blood, the cuffs, the 28 minutes. She didn't need to. Everyone in that courtroom already knew. Colonel Edwin Osei was honored by the NAACP at their annual gala for his role in documenting the arrest. He accepted the recognition in a dark suit, standing straight the way a man does after 30 years in the Marine Corps. He kept his remarks short. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I picked up my phone. That's all it takes." Elijah began seeing a therapist twice a week. The nightmares came less often now. With his grandmother's encouragement, he started a school project on civil rights and accountability. He presented it to his 8th grade class with a steadiness that surprised his teachers. In Washington, the Ashford case became required training material for every incoming DHS field agent. A framed quote from her written statement was mounted in 3 federal courthouses across the country. "The law does not ask what you look like, it asks what you did." Back in Coral Springs, on a quiet Sunday morning, Ashford pulled into her driveway. She placed her Bible on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove to church. No SUVs on the street, no agents on her property, no commands, no hands, no knees. Just a woman in her own home, on her own time, unbothered, unbroken, and unquestioned. If this story moved you, don't just watch in silence. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to see what happens when power, racism, and accountability collide. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
What are you doing in here?
I'm shopping with my daughter.
We received a call about someone who doesn't belong.
I belong wherever I have business.
Got ID to back that
I'm
up? Funny. People like you always have a story.
Senior Chief Darnell Covington had been gone for 11 months. 11 months of encrypted communications, blacked out locations, and missions he would never be allowed to talk about. He was 42 years old, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 18 years of Special Operations service, and he had spent more of his adult life overseas than in his own home. He had missed his daughter Zara's 8th birthday, her 10th, her 13th. He missed the recital where she played piano for the first time in front of an audience. He missed the parent-teacher night where her AP history teacher told an empty chair that Zara was one of the most gifted students she had ever taught. He missed all of it. Not because he didn't care, but because the work he did kept other families safe while his own waited. Zara was 17 now. A straight-A student, quiet, focused, the kind of kid who kept a calendar on her wall and crossed off the days until her father came home. Prom was in 2 weeks. Before his last deployment, Darnell had made her one promise. When I get back, I'm taking you to pick out your dress. Not your mom, not your aunt, me. She had laughed and said he didn't know anything about dresses. He told her he didn't need to, he just needed to be there. On a Thursday afternoon, Darnell walked through the front door in jeans, a clean hoodie, and sneakers. No uniform, no ceremony. Just a father standing in the hallway of his own house for the first time in almost a year. Zara came around the corner, froze, and then ran into him so hard she nearly knocked him back. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed without saying a word. He held her with both arms and closed his eyes. He didn't carry weapons that day. He didn't carry rank or reputation. He carried one thing only, a promise. Saturday, he told her quietly. We're going shopping. Saturday afternoon, Darnell and Zara pulled into the parking lot of Bellevue Elegance, an upscale dress boutique in a predominantly white suburb 20 minutes from their home. The building was clean, modern, with mannequins in the window draped in sequins and tulle. Zara grabbed his arm the moment they stepped out of the car, pulling him toward the entrance with the kind of excitement only a 17-year-old heading to prom could generate. Inside, the store was bright and expensive. Crystal lighting, soft music, racks of gowns organized by color and designer. White mothers and their daughters moved between displays, holding fabric up to the light, checking price tags, whispering opinions to each other. A few heads turned when Darnell and Zara walked through the door. The glances were brief but unmistakable. A woman in her 50s near the front display clutched her handbag slightly tighter as they passed. 2 sales associates near the register exchanged a look. A third, Megan Hollister, 28, walked over with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her gaze lingering a beat too long on Darnell before moving to Zara. "Just looking for a prom dress," Zara said, already scanning the nearest rack. Megan nodded but didn't offer to pull anything. She didn't suggest styles or sizes. She didn't guide them toward the fitting rooms the way she had with the family before them. She stepped back and watched. Darnell noticed everything. His training read the room the way it read any environment, automatically, without effort. The way the staff gravitated toward other customers and away from his daughter, the whispered words behind the counter, the body language that shifted when he made eye contact. He said nothing. He wasn't here to confront anyone or prove a point. He was here for Zara. She held up a lavender gown and grinned at him. "What about this one?" He smiled. "Try it on." "That's what we're here for." She disappeared into the fitting room, and Darnell sat in a velvet chair outside the curtain, hands folded, watching the store move around him with the quiet awareness of a man who had survived places far more dangerous than this. He had no idea that 3 aisles away, Megan Hollister was reaching for the phone behind the register. Megan Hollister waited until Darnell's attention was on the fitting room before she moved. She walked past the register, through the back hallway near the stockroom, and picked up the store phone mounted to the wall. She dialed the non-emergency police line and spoke in a low voice, cupping her hand around the receiver. She told the dispatcher there was a suspicious male in the store. She said he didn't look like he belonged, that he had been lingering near expensive merchandise, and that she was concerned for the safety of her customers. The dispatcher asked for a description. Megan gave one. Black male, tall, muscular build, wearing a hoodie. She didn't mention that he was with his teenage daughter. She didn't mention that he had spoken politely, touched nothing on the racks, and was sitting quietly in a chair waiting while his child tried on a prom dress. She described him the way she saw him, as a threat that didn't fit the room. The dispatcher confirmed a unit would be sent. Megan hung up and walked back to the sales floor, smoothing her blouse, adjusting her expression. She positioned herself near the front counter where she could watch without being questioned. 3 aisles away, Darnell sat in the same velvet chair, legs crossed at the ankle, hands resting in his lap. From behind the fitting room curtain, Zara's voice came through bright and excited. "Dad, how long should I twirl? Like, do I do a slow spin or a full dramatic one?" Darnell laughed softly. "Give me the full show. You only get one prom," she giggled. The curtain rustled. He could hear her adjusting the fabric, stepping into shoes, whispering to herself in the mirror. He leaned back in the chair and smiled. He had no idea that a patrol car was already pulling into the parking lot. The cruiser rolled to a stop near the boutique entrance at 2:47 p.m., 8 minutes after the call. Officer Victor Staines stepped out first. He was 44 years old, 16 years on the Bellevue Police Department, and built like a man who used his size as a first line of communication. His hand went to his belt before his feet hit the pavement. It was habit. The kind of habit that had generated 19 formal complaints over the course of his career. Racial profiling, excessive force, discriminatory stops, intimidation during routine encounters. Every single one had been reviewed by internal affairs. Every single one had been dismissed, downgraded, or filed without action. Supervisors described him in evaluations as effective and direct. Community members in Black and Latino neighborhoods had a different vocabulary. They called him a predator with a badge. They knew his car. They knew his face. They warned their children when they saw him coming. His partner, Officer Nina Shelby, 29, exited the passenger side and followed 2 steps behind. She had been on the force for 3 years and had been paired with Staines for the last 7 months. In that time, she had never once questioned his judgment, never once pushed back on a stop, never once filed a supplemental report noting a concern. She watched, she followed, she stayed quiet. That silence would cost her. Staines pushed through the glass door of Bellevue elegance with the confidence of a man who had never been held accountable for anything. His body camera was active, the red light blinking steadily on his chest. The store was calm, music playing, customers browsing, no disturbance, no raised voices, no visible threat of any kind. His eyes moved across the room and landed on Darnell Covington, seated in a velvet chair outside a fitting room, waiting for his daughter. Staines adjusted his belt and started walking toward him. Shelby followed without a word. Staines stopped 3 feet from the velvet chair. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask a question. He looked down at Darnell and said, "Stand up, hands where I can see them." Darnell looked up. His expression shifted from relaxed to alert in less than a second, the way it did when something in a room changed without warning. He kept his hands on the armrests, visible, open. "Is there a problem, officer? Stand up. Hands where I can see them." Louder this time, sharp enough to cut through the music and turn heads across the store. From behind the fitting room curtain, Zara's voice came through, smaller now. "Dad?" What's going on? Everything's fine, baby. Stay inside. Darnell stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, his palms open at his sides. He was taller than Staines by 2 inches, which only made the officer step closer. "What are you doing in this store?" Staines asked. "Shopping with my daughter. She's trying on a prom dress." "Who are you with?" "I just told you. My daughter. She's right behind that curtain. You have receipts? We haven't bought anything yet. She's still trying things on." "Can you prove you're a customer?" Darnell's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I walked in through the front door with my 17-year-old daughter. We've been here for 20 minutes. Each question landed heavier than the last, not because they were difficult, but because they weren't real questions. They were accusations shaped like procedure. Staines wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for a reason. "You fit a description we were given," Staines said. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Darnell exhaled slowly through his nose. He reached toward his back pocket with his right hand, moving the way he always moved around law enforcement, slow, visible, non-threatening. Staines grabbed his wrist. His grip was hard and immediate. "Slow, real slow. I am going slow," Darnell said quietly, his eyes locked onto Staines. "I'm reaching for my wallet. That's all." Shelby stood 4 feet to the left, her hand resting on her radio, watching everything, saying nothing. The curtain moved. Zara pulled it open with one hand and stepped out barefoot onto the boutique floor, still wearing the lavender prom dress. The hem pooled slightly around her ankles. Her hair was pinned up the way she had been practicing for weeks. She looked like she was ready for the best night of her life. Then she saw her father. Darnell Covington, a man who had survived ambushes in 3 countries, who had carried wounded teammates through gunfire, who had spent 18 years doing the work most people would never know about, was standing with his wrist locked in the grip of a police officer inside a dress shop. Zara's face crumbled. The excitement drained out of her expression like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened, but before she could speak, Staines turned his head toward her and barked, "Stay right there. Don't move." The words hit her like a shove. She flinched. Her eyes filled. Darnell's voice changed for the first time. The calm cracked, and underneath it was something harder, something a man only uses when his child is being spoken to in a way no child should be. "Don't talk to my daughter like that." Staines took it as aggression. He released Darnell's wrist only to grab his shoulder and spin him around with both hands. Darnell's chest hit the mirrored wall beside the fitting rooms. The glass cracked from the center outward in a spiderweb pattern. Staines forced him into a spread position, legs apart, palms flat against the fractured glass. Zara screamed. The sound cut through the entire store. A woman near the accessories wall gasped and pulled her daughter behind her. A man in his 30 seconds near the front display froze with a garment bag in his hand, mouth open. Shelby stood to the side, hand still on her radio, eyes moving between Staines and the growing number of witnesses. She did nothing. Behind the counter, Megan Hollister watched with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak. She didn't move. The entire store was frozen. And Darnell's face was pressed against broken glass while his daughter stood behind him in a prom dress, shaking. Staines didn't stop at the wall. He pulled Darnell back by the collar of his hoodie and forced him downward, first to his knees, then flat onto his stomach on the boutique floor. The polished tile was cold against Darnell's cheek. Staines drove his knee into the center of Darnell's back and pressed his weight down. Darnell did not resist. His hands were open, his body still, his breathing controlled. Every instinct he had trained into his muscles over 18 years of special operations screamed at him to move. He didn't. "I am not resisting," he said. His voice was steady but strained under the weight. "My daughter is watching. Please." Staines said nothing. He pulled Darnell's wrists together behind his back and snapped the handcuffs shut. The metallic click echoed through the silent store like a gunshot. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Zara broke. She let out a sob that came from somewhere deep, the kind of sound a child makes when the world stops making sense. She stood in the lavender prom dress, barefoot on the boutique floor, mascara running down both cheeks, her hands trembling at her sides. She watched her father, the man who had come home to keep a promise, lying face down in handcuffs 3 feet from the fitting room where she had been twirling for him 90 seconds earlier. A white woman near the front of the store pulled her own daughter closer and whispered something about staying out of it. She turned them both away from the scene. An older black woman near the accessories wall, mid-60s, stood perfectly still with her phone raised in front of her, recording. Her hand was steady, her face was tight with fury. A white man in his 30s, wearing a faded Marines t-shirt, stepped forward from the shoe display. His voice was loud and clear. "He hasn't done anything. What are you doing?" Staines snapped his head toward him. "Step back. Now." Shelby spoke for the first time. "Sir, please give us space." But she didn't look at Staines. She didn't challenge the knee on Darnell's back. She didn't question the cuffs. She asked the witness to move, not the officer to stop. Staines searched him right there on the floor, in front of his daughter, in front of every customer in the store, in front of the cameras he didn't yet understand would destroy him. He rolled Darnell slightly to one side and began pulling items from his pockets, one at a time, placing them on the tile like evidence from a crime scene: a wallet, a cell phone, a set of car keys with a worn leather keychain, and a folded piece of paper, softened at the creases from being carried too long. Staines unfolded it without asking. The handwriting was a teenager's, slightly uneven, written in purple ink. It read, "Come home safe, Daddy. I'll save you a dance at prom." Staines glanced at it for less than 2 seconds. Then he dropped it on the floor beside Darnell's face, the way someone discards a receipt they don't need. Zara saw it fall. Her hand went to her mouth. She had written that note the night before his last deployment. She had slipped it into his jacket pocket while he was loading his bag. He had carried it for 11 months across 3 continents and never once let it out of his reach. Now it was on a boutique floor next to a knee and a pair of handcuffs. Staines opened the wallet. He found a driver's license, 2 credit cards, a debit card, and a military ID. He held the military ID up, studied it for a long moment, turned it over, then looked down at Darnell. He paused, and then he said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "Anybody can buy one of these online. You'd be surprised how many guys like you fake being military." He tossed the ID onto Darnell's back like it was nothing, like the man underneath it was nothing. The body camera on Staines's chest recorded every word. The older black woman's phone recorded every word. The ceiling cameras recorded every frame. 3 angles. Crystal audio. No ambiguity. And Darnell lay still on the cold tile, his daughter's note next to his face, his military ID on his back, and the weight of a man who had already decided what he was before he ever walked through the door. Franklin Beaumont pushed through the front door of his own store at 3:04 p.m., carrying a takeout bag and a coffee. He was 67 years old, white-haired, tall, and had owned Bellevue Elegance for 31 years. He knew every display case, every camera angle, every square foot of the building. He stopped 3 steps inside the door, the takeout bag lowered to his side, the coffee stayed frozen in his other hand. A black man was lying face down on his floor in handcuffs. A teenage girl in a lavender prom dress stood nearby, sobbing. 2 police officers stood over them. A dozen customers were pressed against the walls, some recording with their phones, others clutching their children. No one was shopping. No one was speaking. The store smelled like perfume and fear. Franklin set everything down on the nearest display table and walked straight toward Staines. His voice was low and controlled, but carried the kind of authority that comes from owning the room you're standing in. "What is happening in my store?" Staines straightened. "Sir, we responded to a call about a suspicious individual. We're handling it." Franklin turned to Megan. She was still standing behind the register, arms at her sides now, face pale. "Did you call them?" Megan opened her mouth. He was, I thought." Franklin's face went white. Not with fear, with anger. He turned back to Staines. "This man is a customer. He's here with his daughter. She's trying on a prom dress. You have him in handcuffs on my floor. My store has cameras on every wall, and I am looking at what appears to be an assault. Uncuff him, now." Staines shifted his weight. "Sir, we're conducting an investigation." Franklin stepped closer. His voice didn't rise. It sharpened. "You're conducting a disgrace. Uncuff him now, or I'm calling the chief of police myself. I've known him for 20 years. We golf on Sundays. And when he sees what's on my cameras, you're going to wish you'd listen to me in the next 5 seconds." Staines didn't move. The room watched. Every phone still recording. Every witness still frozen. The only sound was Zara crying. Staines reached down and unlocked the cuffs. He did it slowly, deliberately, as if speed would mean admission. The metal came off the left wrist first, then the right. Darnell didn't move immediately. He stayed on the floor for a full breath, collecting himself the way he had been trained to after every controlled situation. Then he pressed his palms flat against the tile and pushed himself up. He rose to his feet slowly. His wrists were red and swollen. His hoodie was scuffed at the shoulder and dusted with grit from the floor. His face had a faint mark from the tile pressed into his cheek. His dignity had been pulled apart in front of his daughter, in front of strangers, in front of cameras. He stood anyway. Zara ran into him before he could turn around. She hit his chest, still wearing the lavender dress, barefoot, her face swollen and streaked with mascara. She grabbed fistfuls of his hoodie and pressed her forehead into him and didn't let go. He wrapped both arms around her and held her the way he had held her the day he came home. "It's okay, baby," he whispered. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Franklin turned to Megan. His voice was flat and final. "Get your things. You're done." She blinked. "Mr. Beaumont, I was just trying to. You called the police on a father shopping with his daughter. In my store. Get your things. Get out. Don't come back." Megan's mouth opened and closed. She looked around the room for support and found none. She walked to the back without another word. Franklin turned toward Staines, who was already moving toward the front door with Shelby a step behind. Franklin stepped into his path. "You're not going anywhere until this is documented. I have your badge number, your face on 6 cameras, and a store full of people who watched every second of what you just did." Staines looked at him for a long moment, jaw clenched, then pushed past him and walked through the door. Shelby followed without looking back. Franklin didn't chase them. He didn't need to. The footage existed. The witnesses existed. The damage was already done and already recorded. He turned back to Darnell, who was sitting in the velvet chair again, Zara curled against his side, the cracked mirror behind them reflecting a father holding his daughter in a dress she hadn't even gotten to show him yet. Darnell made one phone call. He sat in Franklin Beaumont's back office with Zara beside him, a bag of ice pressed to his wrist, and dialed the command duty officer at Naval Special Warfare Command. He spoke for less than 4 minutes. He identified himself by rank and unit. He described the stop, the force, the cuffs, the language. He stated that it had been captured on body camera and by multiple civilian witnesses. Then he hung up and waited. He didn't need to do anything else. The machine did the rest. Within the hour, NCIS was notified. A case file was opened and assigned to a special agent out of the regional field office. Within 2 hours, the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel received a briefing. A senior military attorney flagged the incident as a potential civil rights violation involving an active-duty Special Operations Service member in a civilian setting. Within 3 hours, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division had the case on its desk. A federal liaison placed a call to the Bellevue Police Department requesting preservation of all body camera footage, dispatch recordings, and officer reports related to the encounter. Franklin Beaumont didn't wait to be asked. He contacted his security company that same evening and had every second of boutique footage backed up to an external server and a hard drive locked in his office safe. He provided a full written statement before midnight. The older black woman who had recorded the encounter from the accessories wall was Vivian Osei. She was 61 years old, a retired school teacher, grandmother of 4. She uploaded her video to 3 platforms that night. By midnight, it had crossed 500,000 views. By morning, it was over 1 million. The veteran who had spoken up, Colton Briggs, 34, a former Marine, posted his own account online. He described what he had witnessed in plain, direct language. He named the department. He described the officers. He described a man being slammed into a mirror and cuffed on the floor while his daughter stood in a prom dress and watched. It went viral within hours. The internet identified Staines before the sun came up. His name, his badge photo, his department, his complaint history surfaced by noon. 19 formal allegations. 0 discipline. Local news picked it up Monday morning. By Monday night, it was national. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation by Tuesday. Officers Victor Staines and Nina Shelby were placed on unpaid suspension effective immediately. Their firearms were collected. Their credentials were deactivated. Their access to department systems was revoked. The body camera footage was pulled first. The file was 22 minutes long, beginning from the moment Staines activated the camera in the parking lot and ending after he and Shelby exited the boutique. Investigators watched it in a closed room with the department's legal counsel present. No one spoke during the playback. The footage confirmed every detail, Staines approaching without cause. The commands issued before any question was asked. The wrist grab, the shove into the mirrored wall, the knee in Darnell's back, the handcuffs on a man who never once raised his voice or moved his hands. The search conducted on the floor of a dress boutique, the note from a 17-year-old girl unfolded, read, and dropped on the tile. The military ID examined and tossed onto a man's back with the words, "Anybody can buy one of these online. You'd be surprised how many guys like you fake being military." The footage captured it all because Staines himself had turned the camera on. NCIS agents arrived at the Bellevue Police Department on Wednesday. 2 federal civil rights investigators followed on Thursday. They requested every complaint ever filed against Staines, every internal review, every disposition letter, every supervisor's note. What they found was a pattern the department had chosen to ignore for over a decade. Staines' 19 prior complaints were formally reopened. 8 former victims came forward publicly within the first week, each describing encounters that followed the same script: baseless stops, aggressive searches, racial language, targets who were always black men in affluent areas doing ordinary things, shopping, walking, driving, sitting in parked cars, living in neighborhoods Staines had decided they didn't belong in. The police chief held a press conference on Friday. He stood at a podium with the department seal behind him and called the incident deeply troubling. He promised a full and transparent investigation. He expressed confidence in the process. He did not apologize. Not to Darnell, not to Zara, not to the 8 other victims now standing in front of cameras telling stories the department had buried for years. The community wasn't satisfied. They had heard deeply troubling before. They had watched transparent investigations disappear into filing cabinets. This time, they had footage. This time, they had federal attention. And this time, they were not going to let it go. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed federal charges 6 weeks after the incident. The indictment was direct and specific. Officer Victor Staines was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, assault under color of authority, and filing a false official report. The false report charge stemmed from the account Staines had submitted after the encounter, in which he described Darnell as confrontational and physically resistive. The body camera footage showed neither. Every word of his report was a lie written by a man who assumed no one would ever check. Officer Nina Shelby was formally cited for failure to intervene. She had stood within arm's reach while a compliant man was slammed into a wall, forced to the ground, and searched without cause in front of his minor daughter. She had watched. She had said nothing to stop it. Under federal standards, her silence made her complicit. The Bellevue Police Department entered a federal consent decree. The terms were non-negotiable. Independent oversight of all use of force incidents. Mandatory bias training with annual recertification. A complete restructuring of the internal complaint review process, which federal investigators described in court filings as functionally designed to protect officers rather than serve the public. Staines' trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution called 14 witnesses. They presented the body camera footage on the first day. The The courtroom was silent as the jury watched from Staines' own perspective. A father approached without cause. Commands barked before a single question was asked. A wrist grabbed. A body slammed into a mirror hard enough to crack it. A man forced to the ground. A knee pressed into his back. A teenage girl in a lavender prom dress standing barefoot 3 feet away, screaming. They watched Staines unfold a handwritten note and drop it on the floor without a word. They watched him examine a military ID and toss it onto the back of a man who had served his country for 18 years. They heard him say, "Guys like you, fake being military." The defense argued Staines had responded to a legitimate call and followed established procedure. The prosecution dismantled that argument with the footage itself, with the 19 prior complaints, with the 8 other victims who took the stand and described the same officer doing the same thing to them in different locations across the same city. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge reviewed the sentencing guidelines, noted the pattern of prior conduct, the involvement of a minor witness, and the abuse of public authority. He sentenced Staines to 5 years in federal prison. The maximum allowed. Staines showed no reaction. He was removed from the courtroom in handcuffs, the same kind he had used on Darnell Covington on the floor of a dress boutique, while a 17-year-old girl watched her world crack open. The civil lawsuit was filed within days of the criminal verdict. Darnell's attorneys named every party responsible: Victor Staines, personally; Nina Shelby, personally; the Bellevue Police Department, the City of Bellevue. The complaint ran 47 pages. It cited excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful detention, assault under color of authority, emotional harm to a minor, and systemic failure to address known patterns of discrimination by a department that had received 19 complaints about one officer over 16 years and had done nothing about any of them. Discovery exposed the full depth of the failure. Internal emails showed supervisors acknowledging Staines' pattern of aggressive stops targeting minorities in affluent commercial areas. One email from a lieutenant to the division commander read, "Staines is generating noise again." Another complaint from a shop owner on Meridian. Same profile as the others. "Recommend we talk to him informally." The informal talk never happened. The complaint was filed and forgotten. Another victim. Another folder. Another year. The city's attorneys reviewed the body camera footage, the witness statements, the federal conviction, and the internal records. They knew what a jury would do with that material. They settled before trial. The amount was $2.4 million, but the money was only part of it. The settlement mandated structural reform, a civilian oversight board with full subpoena power and independent investigative authority, quarterly demographic reporting on all stops, detentions, and use of force incidents published publicly, a zero-tolerance policy for supervisors who failed to act on misconduct complaints, and a public database of officer disciplinary records accessible to any resident of the city. Shelby's law enforcement certification was suspended indefinitely following the consent decree. She never returned to policing. She never applied to another department. Her silence in that boutique followed her out of the profession entirely. 2 supervisors who had reviewed and dismissed prior complaints against Staines were formally demoted. One was reassigned to an administrative role with no enforcement authority. The other took early retirement before the demotion took effect. The police chief, who had stood at a podium and called the incident deeply troubling without offering an apology, resigned under mounting pressure from the city council, the community, and the federal oversight team. His resignation letter was 3 sentences long. It mentioned nothing about Darnell Covington, nothing about Zara, nothing about a cracked mirror or a note on the floor. He left the way the department had operated for years, quietly, without accountability. Until now. 2 months later, Zara stood in front of a full-length mirror inside Bellevue Elegance. The store was quiet. It was after hours. Franklin Beaumont had opened it just for them. The dress was emerald green this time, not lavender. She never touched the lavender one again. Franklin had helped her choose it himself, pulling options from the back, holding fabrics up to the light, asking her what made her feel like herself. He didn't charge a cent. He told her the dress was on the house and that if she argued with him about it, he'd add shoes and a matching clutch, she argued. He added them. Darnell stood behind her in full navy dress whites. Every ribbon on his chest was in place, every crease pressed sharp. The uniform fit the way it always had, like it belonged on him, because it did. No one had ever questioned that before the floor of this store, and no one ever would again. Zara looked at herself in the mirror, then turned and looked at her father. "You really came home for this." "I promised," he said. His voice was quiet, his eyes were not. Franklin watched from the doorway with his arms folded, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Vivian Osei sent a card that arrived the morning of prom. It was handwritten. It said, "You are the kind of young woman this world needs more of. Shine tonight." Colton Briggs sent flowers, a simple arrangement with a note that read, "From one service family to another. Semper Fi." That evening, a family friend took a photo on the front porch. Zara in emerald green, Darnell in dress whites, her hand on his arm, his chin high. Both of them looking directly into the camera. The photo was posted online that night. It reached 2 million shares in a week. No caption was needed. The image said everything. A father who came home. A daughter who waited. A promise that held. Back in Bellevue, a training bulletin circulated through the police department the following Monday. It showed a still frame from a body camera. A teenage girl in a lavender dress, barefoot, crying, reaching for her father on the floor of a dress boutique. Under the image were 6 words. "This is what failure looks like." No names were printed. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. This case was intense, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
Sir, stand up for me.
May I ask what this is about?
You've been reported as threatening crew.
I haven't threatened anyone.
He's been watching us the entire flight. He doesn't belong up here.
I have a ticket.
Turn around.
C3A.
Hands behind your back. Now.
I am...
At 35,000 feet over the North Atlantic, 2 federal air marshals pulled a black man out of seat 3A in first class, forced his arms behind his back, and cuffed him in front of every passenger in the cabin. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a threat. He hadn't touched a single person on that plane. The man was Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 16 years of Special Operations service, returning from a classified NATO briefing in Stuttgart, Germany. He was flying on official government travel orders, seated in first class because the Department of Defense had booked him there. The flight attendant who reported him, Karen Lockhart, stood near the galley curtain with her arms crossed, watching the marshals work. A passenger sitting across the aisle would later describe the look on her face as satisfaction. Lockhart had told the captain that Kirkwood was aggressive, erratic, and possibly dangerous. None of it was true. Every camera on that aircraft, every witness statement, and every marshal's report would confirm the same thing. He had done nothing. But by the time the plane touched down at Dulles, Kirkwood was walked off in handcuffs in front of 212 passengers, locked in a federal holding room, and left there for over 3 hours before anyone told him why. Within 72 hours, the FBI had opened a file. NCIS was involved. The Pentagon had sent a formal demand to the airline. And a chain of events was underway that would end careers, trigger a federal investigation, and cost Atlantic Pacific Airlines $6.5 million. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because what this flight attendant did and what happened to her afterward is something you need to see for yourself. Karen Lockhart was 44 years old and had been a senior flight attendant with Atlantic Pacific Airlines for 16 years. She bid exclusively on transatlantic first-class routes, and among crew who had worked with her, she was known by a nickname she had never been told to her face: the Gatekeeper. The name didn't come from nowhere. Over her career, 11 formal complaints had been filed against her by passengers of color. Black and brown travelers reported being asked to show boarding passes a second time after being seated. They described condescending language during meal service, drink orders skipped without explanation, and quiet suggestions that they might be more comfortable in economy. One complaint from a black attorney flying business class described Lockhart telling him that his seat assignment must be a system error and offering to reseat him before takeoff. Every one of those complaints had been reviewed internally and dismissed. Some were marked as misunderstandings, others were filed with no action taken at all. 2 HR supervisors had signed off on closing the cases without investigation. Lockhart had never been disciplined, never been retrained, never been pulled aside and told to change her behavior. To the airline, she was a reliable senior crew member with a clean record. To the passengers she targeted, she was something else entirely. Her junior partner on the Kirkwood flight was Colton Pruitt, 27, 2 years into the job and still on probation. Pruitt followed Lockhart's lead without question. He laughed when she laughed, agreed when she directed, and stayed silent when silence was easier than confrontation. That silence would cost him too. Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood was 38 years old and had spent nearly half his life in naval special warfare. 16 years of active duty, 3 Bronze Stars, multiple deployments to locations that would never appear in any public record. He had led teams through operations that most Americans would never hear about, brought every one of his men home from missions where the odds said he shouldn't have, and carried the kind of service record that senior commanders referenced when they talked about what the best looked like. He was returning stateside after a NATO Special Operations Coordination meeting in Stuttgart, Germany. The trip had been scheduled through SOCOM, and his travel orders, stamped and authenticated, placed him on Atlantic Pacific Flight 471 from Frankfurt to Dulles, Seat 3A, first class. Government booked. He wore civilian clothes, a clean, dark Henley, jeans, boots, and a watch his team had given him after a deployment in a place none of them were allowed to name. He carried a leather duffel that held his Navy dress blues, his rank insignia, his military ID, and a set of classified travel documents. Nothing about him drew attention. That was by design. SEALs didn't announce themselves. At the gate in Frankfurt, he thanked the boarding agent by name after reading her tag. She smiled. On the jet bridge, an older woman struggled to manage a carry-on and a cane at the same time. Kirkwood took the bag without being asked, walked it to her row, and placed it in the overhead bin. She thanked him. He nodded once and moved on. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just built that way. Quiet, controlled, respectful, the kind of man who handled himself the same way whether he was in a combat zone or a boarding line. Kirkwood reached row 3, stowed his duffel in the overhead compartment, and settled into 3A by the window. He buckled his seatbelt, adjusted the headrest, and pulled a paperback from the seat pocket of his bag before closing his eyes briefly. He looked like any other passenger getting comfortable for a long flight. But from the front galley, Karen Lockhart was already watching. Her eyes tracked him from the moment he turned into the first-class cabin. She watched him open the overhead bin. She watched him sit down. She studied his clothes, his bag, his face. Then she turned to the manifest screen near the galley station and scrolled to seat 3A, Kirkwood, D. She looked at the name. She looked back at the man. Then she leaned toward Colton Pruitt, who was folding hot towels beside her, and lowered her voice. "That's not a first-class passenger. Go check his boarding pass." Pruitt walked over without hesitation. He was polite about it. "Excuse me, sir. Mind if I just verify your boarding pass?" Kirkwood reached into his back pocket and handed it over without a word. Pruitt glanced at it. Seat 3A. Name matched. He walked back to the galley and told Lockhart everything was in order. She barely acknowledged it. People steal upgrades all the time. Could be a system glitch. Keep an eye on him. Pruitt nodded and said nothing. In the first-class cabin, 8 other passengers were already seated. A white man in a sport coat, a couple in matching cashmere, a woman with a designer bag taking up the seat beside her. None of them had been asked for their boarding passes. None of them had been watched from the galley. None of them had been flagged before the doors even closed. 3 hours into the flight, the first beverage service began. Lockhart moved through the first-class cabin with a practiced smile, offering drinks to each row. The couple in cashmere got sparkling water with lime. The man in the sport coat got a whiskey neat. The woman with the designer bag got a glass of champagne. Row 3 got nothing. Lockhart passed Kirkwood's seat without slowing, without making eye contact, without a word. He didn't react immediately. He assumed she would circle back. She didn't. After another 10 minutes, he pressed the call button above his seat. The small chimes sounded in the galley. 14 minutes passed before Lockhart appeared at his row. She looked down at him with an expression that wasn't quite hostility, but wasn't service either. "Can I help you?" "I'd take a water when you get a chance," Kirkwood said. Lockhart tilted her head slightly. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Kirkwood held her gaze for a moment. "Seat 3A. That's where I'm sitting." She brought the water without another word and set it on the armrest without a napkin. 20 minutes later, hot towels were distributed through the cabin. Every passenger received one. Every passenger except Kirkwood. Across the aisle in 3B, a white businessman named Gregory Hale had been watching the pattern develop. He shifted in his seat, glanced at Kirkwood, then at Lockhart, and his discomfort was visible. He said nothing yet, but he was paying attention. Kirkwood put in his earbuds, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He had been treated worse in places far more dangerous than an airplane cabin. He chalked it up to bad service and let it go, but Lockhart wasn't letting anything go. In her mind, she had already decided he didn't belong there. Now she just needed a reason to prove it. 5.5 hours into the flight, Kirkwood unbuckled his seatbelt, stood, and walked toward the forward lavatory. He used it, washed his hands, and stepped back into the aisle. On his way to his seat, he paused near the galley entrance and stretched, rolled his neck, pressed his palms into his lower back. A normal thing for anyone sitting in a pressurized cabin for 6 hours over open ocean. 2 other passengers had done the same thing during the flight. Neither had been noticed. Lockhart noticed Kirkwood. She stood at the galley counter and watched him stretch for fewer than 30 seconds before turning to Colton Pruitt. Her voice was low but urgent. "He's watching us. He's been acting erratic the whole flight. Something's off." Pruitt looked past her toward Kirkwood, who was already walking back toward his seat. He hesitated. He could see a man stretching. He couldn't see a threat, but he said nothing. He didn't ask what specifically was erratic. He didn't challenge the characterization. He looked at Lockhart, then looked at the floor, and stayed silent. That silence gave her everything she needed. Lockhart picked up the interphone connected to the flight deck and pressed the call button. When the captain answered, her language was precise and deliberate. She reported a suspicious and potentially threatening passenger in first class. She said he had been aggressive with crew throughout the flight. She said he was now lingering near the galley in a threatening manner. She used words she knew would trigger a specific response. Aggressive, threatening, lingering. The captain had not seen Kirkwood, had not spoken to him, had not left the flight deck once during the crossing, but Federal Aviation Protocol required him to act on a crew member's threat assessment. He made the call to the air marshals seated in coach. And with that single report, built entirely on fabrication, Lockhart set into motion a sequence of events that could not be undone. Kirkwood was back in his seat, seatbelt fastened, paperback open to page 84, when 2 men in plain clothes appeared at the edge of his row. They didn't introduce themselves by name. One stood in the aisle. The other positioned himself 1 row behind. Their jackets were unbuttoned. Their expressions were flat and rehearsed. "Sir, we need you to stand up." Kirkwood looked up from his book. He closed it slowly, placed it in the seat pocket, and stood. His hands were visible at his sides, palms open. His voice was calm and even. "What's this about? You've been identified as a potential threat by a member of the crew. We need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. There's been a mistake." Kirkwood said, "I haven't done anything. Turn around, sir." He complied. He didn't tense. He didn't pull away. He placed his wrists together behind his back the way a man does when he has been trained to survive situations far worse than this one. The cuffs clicked shut. The sound carried through the silent cabin. Every passenger in first class was watching. The woman with the designer bag had her hand over her mouth. The couple in cashmere sat frozen. Gregory Hale leaned forward in 3B. "He hasn't done anything. I've been sitting right here the entire flight. He hasn't said a word to anyone." One of the marshals glanced at Hale. "Sir, please remain seated." A woman 3 rows back raised her phone and began filming. Near the galley curtain, Karen Lockhart stood with her arms crossed, watching. She didn't speak. She didn't intervene, she watched. The marshals walked Kirkwood down the aisle toward the rear of the aircraft. Every row turned as he passed. He was cuffed to an armrest in the last row of coach. He sat down without resistance, without raising his voice. He asked one question, once, clearly. "Can you tell me specifically what I'm accused of?" No one answered. Atlantic Pacific Flight 471 touched down at Dulles International Airport at 4:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Before the seatbelt sign was turned off, before a single passenger stood to reach for their luggage, the forward cabin door opened and 4 figures stepped on board, 2 FBI agents, 2 airport police officers. They walked the length of the aircraft without speaking to anyone and stopped at the last row of coach, where Kirkwood sat cuffed to the armrest, spine straight, eyes forward. They uncuffed him from the seat and recuffed his hands behind his back. Then they walked him up the aisle toward the front of the plane. 212 passengers watched. A father pulled his young daughter closer. A teenager lifted his phone. A woman in row 14 pressed her fingers to her lips and shook her head slowly. Kirkwood didn't look left or right. He kept his chin level and his breathing measured. He walked the way he had been trained to walk under pressure. Controlled, silent, present. They took him through the jet bridge and into the terminal, past the gate area where arriving passengers turned and stared, past the baggage signs and the currency exchange kiosk, and into a windowless federal holding room on the lower level of the airport. Concrete walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, a single fluorescent light humming overhead. They sat him in a chair, removed one cuff, and secured the other to a steel loop welded to the table. His leather duffel, the one containing his Navy dress blues, his military ID, his rank insignia, and his classified travel orders stamped by SOCOM, was taken to another room. Then they left. No one told him why he was there. No one read him his rights. No one asked if he needed water or food or a phone call. He sat in that room for 3 hours and 17 minutes before another human being spoke to him. The silence was deliberate. It was a technique designed to create anxiety, to make people talk, to break composure. It didn't work on Kirkwood. He had completed SEER training, the military's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape program designed to prepare operators for capture and interrogation by hostile forces. He had endured simulated captivity in conditions built to replicate the worst-case scenario. A quiet room at Dulles with a fluorescent light and a metal table didn't come close. He sat perfectly still, controlled his breathing, and waited. 3 hours and 17 minutes after Kirkwood was placed in that room, the door opened. A single FBI agent walked in carrying the leather duffel. He didn't sit down. He didn't introduce himself. He set the bag on the metal table, unzipped it, and began removing the contents one item at a time. First, the Navy dress blues, folded with military precision, creases sharp enough to cut paper. Then the rank insignia, Senior Chief Petty Officer, then the ribbons, 3 bronze stars among them, then the military ID, photo matching the man sitting across from him. Then the travel orders, printed on official letterhead, stamped by United States Special Operations Command, detailing authorized travel from Stuttgart, Germany to Washington, D.C., in connection with a classified NATO coordination meeting. The agent stared at the documents for a long moment. He looked at Kirkwood, he looked back at the orders, then he zipped the bag, picked it up, and walked out of the room without saying a single word. 20 minutes passed. The door opened again. This time, 2 different agents entered. Their posture was different. Their tone was different. Everything about the room shifted. Senior Chief Kirkwood, we need to understand what happened on that flight. Kirkwood was still cuffed to the table. He nodded once and began speaking. His account was precise, clinical, and delivered without emotion or embellishment. Times, seat numbers, names he had overheard, descriptions of each interaction. He recounted the skipped service, the delayed response to his call button, the question about whether he was in the right cabin, the hot towel that never came, the stretch near the galley, the marshals at his row. He delivered it the way a special operator delivers a debrief. Facts only. Sequence intact. Nothing added. Nothing left out. The two agents exchanged a look. One of them reached across the table and unlocked the cuff from Kirkwood's wrist personally. "We're going to get to the bottom of this." Within the hour, calls were being made to NCIS, to Atlantic Pacific Airlines Corporate Security Division, and to the Pentagon. The investigation moved fast. Federal agents pulled every available piece of evidence from Flight 471, and the picture that emerged was not complicated. It was damning. The passenger's cell phone video, filmed by a woman in row 6, captured the takedown in full. Kirkwood standing calmly, the marshals cuffing him without resistance, Gregory Hale in 3B protesting that the man had done nothing wrong, and Karen Lockhart standing near the galley curtain with her arms folded, watching it all with an expression that the filming passenger would later describe in her written statement as satisfied. The aircraft's internal CCTV told the rest of the story. Cameras captured Lockhart tracking Kirkwood from the moment he boarded. They captured her checking the manifest and leaning toward Colton Pruitt. They captured the first beverage service, where every first-class passenger received a drink except the man in 3A. They captured Lockhart's 1-4-minute delay in responding to his call button. They captured her walking hot towels to every other row and passing his without stopping. They captured Kirkwood standing near the galley for fewer than 30 seconds, stretching his back before returning to his seat. And they captured Lockhart picking up the interphone to the flight deck less than a minute later. The air marshal's own written reports confirmed that Kirkwood had been fully compliant during the encounter. Zero signs of aggression, zero resistance, zero verbal hostility. The captain's statement confirmed he had never personally observed any threatening behavior and had acted solely on Lockhart's report over the interphone. When investigators reviewed that report, they found she had never documented a single specific behavior. No description of a threatening act, no mention of a weapon, no articulable reason for concern. Just two words used over and over: suspicious, threatening, words that, when cross-referenced with every second of available footage, meant nothing more than a black man sitting in first class. Karen Lockhart was brought into a federal interview room at Dulles 4 hours after the plane landed. She walked in with her shoulders back and her chin raised. She sat down across from the FBI agent with the posture of someone who expected to be thanked. She had reported a threat. She had followed protocol. She had done her job. The agent opened a folder, clicked a pen, and asked a simple question. Describe the specific threatening behavior you observed from the passenger in seat 3A. Lockhart paused for half a second. He was looking around a lot, scanning the cabin, acting nervous. The agent turned a laptop screen toward her and pressed play. The CCTV footage showed Kirkwood reading his book, eyes down, sleeping with his head against the window, looking out at the clouds, sitting still with his earbuds in. Which part of this is scanning the cabin? Lockhart shifted in her seat. He was near the galley, lingering. That's a red flag. The agent checked a printed manifest log. 6 other passengers moved through the galley area during the flight. You didn't report any of them. Why? Lockhart didn't answer immediately. The agent continued. Did you ask any other passenger in first class to verify their boarding pass? No. Did you skip any other passenger during beverage service? No. Did you bypass any other passenger during the hot towel distribution? No. The room was quiet for a long time. Then the agent slid a single printed image across the table. It was a still frame pulled from the cabin CCTV. It showed the moment the air marshals were cuffing Kirkwood in his seat, and in the background, standing near the galley curtain, was Lockhart, arms crossed, watching, smiling. Lockhart stared at the photo. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The confidence that had carried her into that room drained from her face in a single breath. The agent leaned back. He just didn't seem like he belonged in first class. Those were your words on the interphone. Can you explain what that means? Lockhart's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. The call reached Atlantic Pacific Airlines corporate headquarters in Dallas before the sun came up the next morning. By 8 a.m., the executive crisis team had assembled in a closed conference room on the 14th floor. By 9 a.m., every attorney on the airline's in-house legal staff had been pulled from other matters. By noon, The airline's VP of operations had been briefed on the full scope of what had happened on Flight 471, and the internal review that followed made everything worse. 11 formal complaints had been filed against Karen Lockhart over the previous 9 years. Every single one came from a passenger of color. Black travelers reported being asked to prove their seat assignments. A Latino businessman described being told he looked like he was in the wrong cabin. A South Asian woman traveling with her children recalled Lockhart, suggesting she might be more comfortable farther back. 11 complaints. All reviewed internally, all dismissed. Some were marked as resolved with no action. Others were noted as misunderstandings. 2 HR supervisors had signed off on closing the files without a single follow-up interview. Colton Pruitt was interviewed separately. He sat across from investigators with his hands clasped on the table and admitted what the footage already showed. He knew Lockhart's report to the captain was exaggerated. He knew Kirkwood hadn't done anything threatening. He said nothing because she was senior crew, and he was still on probation. "I didn't want to make trouble," Pruitt told the investigators. The investigator wrote that down without expression. The Pentagon's response arrived by secure letter the same afternoon. A Department of Defense spokesperson followed with a public statement that left no room for interpretation. An active-duty Special Operations Service member was unlawfully detained based on a fabricated report with clear racial motivation. The department expects full accountability from all parties involved. Within 48 hours, the story reached national media. The headline was everywhere, and inside the airline's headquarters, every person in that conference room understood the same thing. This could not be contained, walked back, or quietly resolved. The terminations began within the week. Karen Lockhart was fired from Atlantic Pacific Airlines for gross misconduct, filing a false threat report against a passenger, racial discrimination in the performance of her duties, and violation of federal aviation regulations governing the reporting of security threats on commercial aircraft. Her crew credentials were revoked. Her access to airline systems was deactivated. Her 6-year career ended not with a retirement ceremony, but with a letter hand-delivered by corporate counsel in the presence of 2 witnesses. Colton Pruitt was suspended immediately and placed under internal investigation for failure to intervene and for corroborating a report he knew to be false. He resigned 3 weeks later before the investigation concluded. His resignation letter was one sentence. The airline's head of crew training was removed from her position after the internal review revealed that no module in the company's training curriculum addressed racial bias in threat assessment or the legal consequences of filing false security reports. 2 HR supervisors, the same 2 who had signed off on dismissing 11 prior complaints against Lockhart without investigation, were placed on administrative leave pending a full audit of their case handling. Neither would return to their roles. But the most significant consequence came from outside the airline. The FBI formally referred Lockhart's case to the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. The referral cited potential federal charges related to filing a knowingly false report on a commercial aircraft, a violation of federal law carrying a maximum sentence of up to 20 years in prison. Lockhart, who had walked into her FBI interview expecting to be thanked, now faced the possibility of a federal indictment. Atlantic Pacific Airlines issued a public apology 72 hours after the story broke nationally. It was 4 paragraphs long, carefully worded by legal counsel, and avoided using the words racism, discrimination, or wrongful. The public response was immediate and uniform. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close. Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood retained a civil rights attorney within 2 weeks of the incident. The lawsuit was filed in federal court, and it named 3 defendants. Karen Lockhart, individually, Atlantic Pacific Airlines, and the airline's corporate parent company. The complaint alleged racial discrimination, false imprisonment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The evidence attached to the filing was overwhelming. Multi-angle CCTV footage from the aircraft showing every interaction between Lockhart and Kirkwood. Cell phone video from a passenger capturing the arrest and Lockhart watching from the galley. Written statements from Gregory Hale and 4 other first-class passengers confirming that Kirkwood had been singled out. The air marshal's reports confirming full compliance and zero aggression. The captain's statement confirming he had acted solely on Lockhart's characterization and had never observed anything himself. And the complete record of 11 prior complaints against Lockhart, every one from a passenger of color, every one dismissed without meaningful action. But it was the discovery phase that broke the case open entirely. Internal emails between airline supervisors revealed conversations that no jury would forgive. One manager had described Lockhart as old school but harmless. Another had responded to a complaint from a black passenger by writing, "Some people are just too sensitive about this stuff. File it and move on." A third email, sent after one of the dismissed complaints, read, "Karen's been here 14 years. She's not going anywhere over a hurt feeling." The airline's legal team saw what was coming. The case never reached trial. Atlantic Pacific Airlines settled for $6.5 million, $3.8 million in compensatory damages, covering false imprisonment, emotional distress, reputational harm, and lost duty time. $2.7 million in punitive damages assessed against both the airline and Lockhart individually. As part of the settlement, the airline agreed to implement mandatory anti-bias training for all cabin crew, establish an independent review board for discrimination complaints with authority to override internal HR decisions, and install enhanced cabin monitoring systems on all aircraft to ensure that future incidents would be recorded from every angle. The money was significant, the reforms were structural, but for Kirkwood, the settlement was never about either. It was about the record. Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood returned to duty the following Monday. He reported to his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command, sat through a formal debrief on the incident, and was told one thing that mattered more to him than any settlement figure. You handled yourself with the discipline and restraint expected of a SEAL, not just on that flight, through every part of what came after. Kirkwood nodded once. That was enough. He didn't give interviews. He didn't release a statement. He didn't post on social media or accept invitations to appear on cable news panels that wanted him to sit under studio lights and relive the worst moment of his civilian life for ratings. He let the record speak. The footage, the filings, the outcome, quietly, without press coverage or public announcement, he used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal assistance fund for active duty service members and veterans who faced racial discrimination during travel. The fund provided attorney referrals, documentation support, and direct financial assistance to those who couldn't afford to fight back on their own. He never put his name on it. 7 months after Flight 471, Kirkwood boarded another transatlantic flight. First class, same airline. He walked down the jet bridge, turned into the cabin, and stowed his duffel in the overhead bin. A flight attendant greeted him at his row with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard. Can I get you anything before takeoff?" He shook his head. "I'm fine, thank you." He sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and opened a book. No one checked his boarding pass. No one watched him from the galley. No one questioned whether he belonged in his own seat. Back at Atlantic Pacific Airlines Training Center in Dallas, a new module had been added to the mandatory crew certification program. It opened with a single image displayed on a projection screen. A still frame from the cabin CCTV of Flight 471. It showed a black man being handcuffed in seat 3A by 2 federal air marshals. And in the background, near the galley curtain, a flight attendant standing with her arms crossed, smiling. Beneath the image, one line in plain black text, "This cost us $6.5 million. It should have cost us nothing." No names were printed on the slide. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. If this story moved you, don't just watch in silence. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to see what happens when racism meets accountability at 35,000 feet. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.